Previously on Straight to Video Books, and I am sitting here at the risk of being arrested with a swollen eye, asking you for a moment of your time, your presence. Savannah laughed. Meet me tonight at 10 p.m. at the Meadow. Brandon played dumb. Which meadow? Savannah gave Brandon a sarcastic gaze. You know which one. I recognize the sound of that motor. Now get out of here. Brandon did as he was told, riding away swifter than what would be considered safe in the driveway. The display of careless conduct made Savannah chuckle more. Grant, I am so sorry Savannah has treated you this way. She won't listen to me. And this morning, I walked outside and saw this greasy thing sitting on this motorcycle like some dirty biker. But how was anyone going to take Grant seriously now? The first thing was first. It was time to send a message. Savannah needed to learn that you do not humiliate a man like Grant Vaughn. And that trailer trash that she had been whoring around with was about to find out. It was in his best interest to stay on his side of town. It was time to put things in order. Now on with the show. Ash, Rose, and Jackson sat on the house's front porch they shared with Brandon. It was a hot afternoon, but nothing that a few cold beers, a seat in the shade, and a pair of shorts could not help. The trio was deep into their drinks in a game of Texas Hold'em. A pile of coins sat in the middle of the table before the friends. Otis Redding played softly from a single-speaker radio, propped up on the windowsill. Jackson peeked at his cards, mulling his following action. Rose downed a long swig from her beer. Ash was annoyed. Any day now? Jackson glanced up from his cards and grinned. I call. Lowering his hand gradually, he delivered 3 jacks. Ash smiled and nodded. 3 jacks for Jackson. Nice, but it's just no match for my queens. Ash dropped her cards, revealing her winning hand of 3 queens. Jackson pounded the table and crossed his arms over his chest. I don't want to play anymore. Rose practically gagged on her beer with laughter. Oh, you made him pout. Rose walked around to Jackson's side and kissed him on the cheek. Jackson snapped his head away from her in defiance. The dramatic motion compelled Ash and Rose to wail with laughter. The sound of Brandon's motorcycle approaching from down the road captured the 3 buddies' awareness. Brandon was gone before anyone awoke and had not been seen for the day. The only news anyone heard was from a neighbor who said he had been picked up by the police. But no one had gotten a call asking for bail and his bike was missing, which suggested he was not in jail. But where had he been all day? Brandon pulled up on his motorcycle. He parked on the front lawn, feet away from the front porch. Now, where has he been all day? Asked Jackson. He went to see her, said Ash quietly so Brandon could not hear her. Jackson discreetly asked, who is her? Ash dealt another hand of cards. Guess genius. The explanation came to Rose and Jackson at that exact moment. They let out a loud gasp. Rose communicated in a whisper that Brandon could not hear. You really don't think that? Ash gathered her cards. Yes. And yes, he is that stupid. Brandon stepped onto the porch and removed a can of beer from a cooler in the corner of the patio. Ash peeked at Brandon from over her cards. The stare on her face gave her objection away. Rose was smiling and in demand of gossip. So Romeo, how is Juliet? Brandon sipped his beer. She died, stabbed herself with a dagger. Sad story, you should read it. Ash took a breath in an attempt to contain her annoyance. I'll take 2. She tossed 2 cards into the middle of the table and grabbed 2 new ones. Jackson and Rose had lost interest in the game. They were more inquisitive of Brandon. Jackson joined in the integration. Ah, come on, man. Don't do us like that. You know what she means. Brandon straddled a vacant chair and took a swig of his beer before talking. I thought we were talking about Shakespeare. Ash inserted herself into the conversation. Jackson, your call. Are you taking any cards? Jackson was not paying any attention to Ash. He leaned over the table towards Brandon and grinned. Man, don't play that game with me. Was Savannah happy to see you? Brandon looked at Jackson directly and asked, what makes you think I went over there? Rose and Jackson tossed their hands up and loudly claimed that Brandon was full of shit. Ash gave up on Jackson. Jackson holds, Rose. What about you? Rose was busy probing Brandon. We all know you don't dress up for no reason. Tell the truth. Where were you? Ash had had enough. She flung her cards down so forcefully that it almost knocked the beers on the table over. What the hell? Are we playing cards? All stares diverted toward Ash. What? I want to play cards, not gossip over who Brandon is sniffing around. Jackson glanced down at his cards and stated, I fold. Now tell me, what happened, man? Ash vaulted from her chair, slapped her hands on the table, and yelled at the group. Fine, if you guys want to jabber like a knitting circle, proceed. But here is a suggestion. We live in a realistic world, not one of your fairy tale books, Brandon. The orphan from the wrong side of the tracks does not get the girl. His face gets smashed by her overprivileged, roided-up boyfriend. We, your true friends, get yanked into the middle. Grow up and say hello to the real world, Peter Pan. Rose and Jackson understood the routine. They took their drinks from the table and sat back, monitoring but keeping out of it. Brandon smiled. He had no mindset to squabble. In Greek mythology, Pan is known as the god of the wild. Ash turned from the table and marched into the house, slamming the door behind her. Night descended over the town. It was warm dusk with a full moon and a delicate breeze. A fine evening to open the windows and let the night air fill a house, or a good night for a horseback ride. Moonlight shimmered amidst the trees behind Savannah's family property. It was unusual for her to ride at twilight, but nothing Savannah had done recently was in her typical pattern. Leisurely trotting through the tunnel of trees that led to the meadow, Savannah questioned herself. What was she doing? What did she really know about this Brandon guy? She knew he volunteered with kids. That was certainly worth something. It was more than Grant would have ever done. He knew where Savannah's meadow was, proving he was the mysterious stranger she had heard with the motorcycle. Savannah discerned a resolve inside of herself. It was more potent than any concern she had. It was driving her forward. She had to see this through. The moment had come. Brandon was sitting on his motorcycle beneath the moonlight in the meadow where he had seen Savannah many times before, going over what to communicate, how to speak, and wondering, why am I so freaking nervous? The sound of hooves or his heart racing, Brandon was not so sure anymore. Either way, the noise caught his attention. Through the full moon's glow across the meadow, there she was, Savannah, riding her horse. She reached the edge of the entrance through the tunnel and dismounted. Trigger acted skittish. Savannah could sense the energy coming from him, or was he reacting to her nerves? She rubbed the horse's face and directed him deeper into the meadow by the reins. Brandon was nowhere to be seen. Savannah wondered if he was even coming. The idea that this could be a cruel game entered her mind. Maybe something was wrong. What if Grant had gotten hold of him? Savannah would not put it past him after the viciousness she had seen in him recently. Savannah was starting to have it with all of these ideas. Never in her life could she remember so many feelings in such a short span. Brandon emerged from behind the oak tree in the middle of the meadow. He wore a well-fitted black t-shirt, his hair pulled back in a ponytail, boot-cut Wranglers, and leather motorcycle boots. Savannah struggled to hide her grin. She was radiating happiness and excitement. The young couple walked towards each other through the grass, blowing in the sweet breeze under the night sky. Brandon and Savannah met in the middle of the field. "Good evening, Savannah." "Hi, Brandon," Savannah said, smiling. Brandon began petting Savannah's dear horse, Trigger. The steed reacted by dropping his head and neighing. "Aw, he likes you." Savannah was delighted. "What's his name?" "This is Trigger. Trigger, this is Brandon. Nice to meet you, Trigger." Trigger bobbed his head up and down as if he agreed with Brandon. Savannah was startled. "He never behaves this way with anyone. He likes you." Brandon smiled. "Well, the feeling is mutual, sir." Savannah glanced over Brandon's shoulder. Shining in the twilight of the stars was Brandon's motorcycle. "What about you?" "What's its name?" Brandon looked from Trigger to Savannah. She tilted her head toward his bike. "What's your motorcycle's name?" "Triumph," the response was blurted out. "How did you decide on that?" Brandon shrugged. "It's a Triumph motorcycle." "Well, how original of you," said Savannah, sounding let down. "Sorry, I never gave it any thought before. I could call it Bonnie. It is a Bonneville." Triumph is better, but more thoughtfulness is needed. It deserves a name. I was under the impression that men liked naming their stuff. Brandon had never thought about it, but giving his motorcycle a name would attach him to it more, and attachment was scary. Guess I'm not like most guys. Savannah walked over to Brandon's motorcycle. She examined it with reverence. It's a beautiful bike. You should think about it and give it a name. Did your dad teach you about motorcycles? Brandon reached into a backpack sitting on the seat and pulled out a rolled-up knapsack. No, I never met him. I just always loved Triumph motorcycles. All the cool guys I liked as a kid rode them. Bob Dylan, Steve McQueen, Richard Gere, and an officer and gentleman. So you're a regular rebel without a cause. Brandon picked a clearing in the grass and laid the knapsack out. I don't know if I'm James Dean cool, but he did own a 1955 Triumph. Brandon sat down and patted the spot beside him, but Savannah did not sit. Did your mom raise you? Brandon shook his head no. She died giving birth to me. I grew up in the Sacred Heart Orphanage. I'm sorry to hear about your mother. That is why you volunteer at the orphanage. Brandon leaned back on his elbow, his legs stretched before him, and Savannah stood over him. More like going home for a family visit than volunteering. I think of it this way. I'm a regular Charles Dixon character, with some Johnny Cash and Bruce Springsteen song lyrics tossed in. Brandon pondered what he had just said. Wow, now that I consider it, that is sad and pretentious too. Hey, self-awareness sucks. Savannah needed the moment of levity. It caused her to smile. Brandon sensed Savannah was not in a rush to sit beside him. He generously scooted to the right side, waving his hand over the blanket to show her the space he offered. Savannah took a seat and spoke as she got relaxed. It could be worse. You could be a John Steinbeck character. Brandon contemplated the options before him. Orphan versus shooting your mentally challenged best buddy in the back of the head. That is a tough one. Brandon confessed with a bit of shame in his voice. I tore that book into pieces and tossed it off a bridge. Savannah was in disbelief. Why, it's classic. Brandon was defensive. It made me cry. I hate crying. Savannah and Brandon both giggled. Well, remind me not to hurt your feelings, Brandon assured Savannah. I wouldn't toss you off a bridge. I would run away home. I cry ugly. No one should ever see it. Hey, but I'm here to learn about you. So far, you know my life story, and you've told me nothing. Savannah shrugged. What about me? I'm boring. No one is trying to write a book or a song about a spoiled girl who had life handed to her. Brandon considered what Savannah said. Maybe a soap opera, but you would need to do something self-destructive, possibly an eating disorder or a coke addiction. That could be fun. The couple was laughing again. Brandon looked Savannah over and declared, My literary reference for you is Arwen from Lord of the Rings. Savannah was taken off guard by the observation. What gives you that idea? Brandon looked her in the eye. I know you value adventure, curiosity, and empathy, and even though you appear to have it all, you're not happy. You want to forge your own path. Savannah was fascinated. Wow, well-read and observant. Brandon shook his head in disagreement. I'm just a know-it-all with a library card. Savannah was still charmed. She smiled, and her eyes sparkled in the moonlight. Arwen runs off with a mortal man against her family's wishes. Savannah's smile was ever so wily. Is that how you see this going? The moment had become more electric with those comments. Brandon felt it, but compliments made him uneasy. I never said I was Aragon. That guy is a noble warrior and a king. I think you are more than you realize, Brandon. You are alone with a woman I hope you consider attractive, and you have not misbehaved. That is very noble. You stood up for your friends and me last night, even though you were outnumbered. That is behavior that is aligned with a warrior's conduct, and you still help at the orphanage you grew up in, doing the work to assist your subjects in your community, or said differently, your kingdom. Brandon gazed up at the stars above him, thinking about what Savannah had said. He looked down at the gorgeous woman in front of him. Their eyes connected, and Brandon whispered her name. Savannah. Yes, Brandon. She knew it. Brandon was going to kiss her. She did not know if she was ready for it, but Savannah knew she did not have it in her to stop him. Will you fill out my resume? The question startled Savannah. She gave into another burst of giggles. She laughed so hard that she fell over and had to brace herself by placing her hand on Brandon's leg. Savannah meant to move her hand away, but Brandon touched it, gently placing his hand on hers. Savannah stopped giggling. She felt the same sense of belonging and protection she felt the night before while dancing with Brandon. The two said nothing as they scooted closer to each other. It was not a lustful compulsion driving them, just the yearning to be in each other's arms, to be together, holding and feeling each other's presence. It was sudden and caught both of them off guard, but it was a lingering that Savannah realized had been there all along. It was the peace she had been feeling was missing. That was where the couple stayed. Still talking, sharing, going deeper, but tightly secure in each other's arms. Rose, Ash, and Jackson sat on the roll-out bed in the center of their house's living room, with all the lights off. Only the glow of the television illuminated the room. The house's windows were open, allowing the summer breeze to blow in and cool the trio. They passed a bowl of popcorn back and forth while watching the classic Night of the Living Dead on the television. After the fight the night before, knowing that Brandon was out with Savannah, Ash could not shake the sensation that something awful would happen, not to mention sitting here in the dark watching a small, innocent girl slowly transform into a zombie. In fright, Ash looked away from the screen and towards a window at the side of the living room. A gust of wind blew the blanket back that covered the window, and Ash could swear she saw someone pass by. Ash closed her eyes, shook her head, and pushed the idea aside. But the movement at the window was followed by the unmistakable sound of a trash can being knocked over. The commotion caused all three mates to leap in unison. Jackson and Rose laughed at their shock, but Ash did not laugh. She proclaimed, as a matter of fact, "Someone is outside." Rose and Jackson's laughter paused. They glanced at Ash, then at each other, then commenced to laughing again. Ash's frustration was palpable, but she restrained her voice. With the windows open, she did not want any potential trespassers to hear her. "Damn it, I am serious. Someone is outside." Jackson tried to assure her otherwise. "It's probably the kids playing in the backyard." Ash rejected the possibility soundly. "That was no kid, somebody is in the backyard." Rose and Ash examined Jackson with looks of pleading. He gazed back. "What the hell? Don't all volunteer at once." Jackson got out of bed and shoved his feet into his shoes, bemoaning the whole time. "This is some bullshit. Send me out there to see what the noise is," Rose shouted out to him. "Stop being a baby. You're the man. It's your job to protect us." Jackson smiled at Rose. "I'll protect you from the big bad stray cat playing in the trash." Jackson was at the front door when Ash called. "I'm coming too." "Calm down, worst case it's Charlie, the dope fiend. All he'll do is steal some of Brandon's tools, then try to sell them back as his own." Ash was already heading out the door before Jackson finished his sentence. "Then I'll help you handle Charlie." Rose realized she was about to be alone in a house with only a horror film keeping her company. She got up and scampered out the door, shoving Jackson onwards. The trio paced across the shaky ancient porch, down the steps, and into the nighttime. The streets were deserted and most streetlights were broken, creating long stretches of darkness. Jackson was at the front with Rose, pushing him along. Ash wavered behind, surveying the surroundings. Her friends shifted to the house's side, but Ash looked intensely down the street, peering through the darkness, spotting a car that was out of place. It was parked far in the distance and obscured in shadow, but Ash could tell it did not belong there. Stepping nearer and her vision coming into focus, Ash sensed her heart plunge. Lawns away, parked beneath a tree, was a black luxury SUV. Its plates had written in Greek letters, WAO. Ash sprinted back towards her house, running for her friends. She shouted, "It's them! They are here!" Rose and Jackson heard Ash screaming from the backyard. "Who is here?" Jackson asked Rose. A man's voice replied from the darkness, "We are," then delivered a vicious blow to the side of Jackson's skull with the blunt handle of a metal nightstick. Jackson dropped to a knee. His eyes were blurry and his senses dashed. Another man emerged from the dark and hit Jackson over the head. That shot dropped Jackson face first into the dirt. Rose ran to help Jackson. As she started to scream, her voice was cut off by a sizable gloved hand. "Shh, now consider what you are about to watch. A friendly reminder to stay on your side of the tracks." 3 more men emerged, each taking turns kicking Jackson in the ribs, head, stomach, and every exposed part they could land a shot. Ash ran directly from down the street, where she located the car back into the house, into the living room, and seized a loose axe handle, missing the blade. Brandon stowed the handle under his bed as a security measure. She then dashed out the back door with the axe handle overhead. The nearest aggressor was hit with a severe blow over the back of the neck. Ash aimed for his head but was too short to land the shot. The attempt captured the man's attention but did not adequately end the invasion. Instead, awareness diverted to Ash. She was loading up to swing again but was yanked off her feet and slammed painfully to the ground. The attacker breathed intensely into Ash's ear, and his hand grasped her throat. Tightening slowly, he was cutting off her oxygen. "You filthy little slut. I got something I want to give you, something to make sure you never forget me." A loud shotgun blast reverberated, and Ash felt the man's weight rise from her. She brushed away tears of despair and madness as she observed the crew of assailants flee. A next-door neighbor was awoken by the commotion and came to the rescue. The discharge of his shotgun was all that thwarted the vicious onslaught. The helpful neighbor assisted Ash to her feet. Her first thought was to aid Jackson. Rose knelt beside him, sobbing and calling his name. "Jackson, honey, squeeze my hand, baby. Let me know if you hear me." The sight of his face was terrible. It was swollen, and his midsection was a map of severe trauma. Jackson had been beaten to the point that blood seemed to come from every orifice. Rose looked up at Ash. "He can't hear me. There is too much blood." Ash ran back into the house and dialed 911. Waiting for an operator to answer, Ash screamed in a fiery rage, "Where the fuck is Brandon?" On the next episode of Straight to Video Books, Brandon sprinted for the door. One foot was out when the phone rang again. Brandon left the front door open and turned to answer. "Ash, I'm leaving right now. What's up? Guess again, pound puppy." Brandon recognized the voice, the coldness. His blood boiled and he cried out, "You motherfucker, I swear when I get my hands on you, I'm going to..." Brandon was cut off. "You're not going to do shit but sit there and listen to every goddamn word I have to say.